Hello and welcome to this edition of SFG Top Performance Podcast for Feed and Grain. Today, Scott Gates and I will take care of the podcast. I'll start off with some grain information and a lot of stuff this week. Thursday, the USDA released their first snapshot of the expected plantings for this coming year, along with the stocks report. Looking at corn, the corn stocks, 30 million less than expected. Not a big deal there. A little bit of support, but not huge. The big news came in the acres. Going into the report, the average guess from the so-called experts was 92 million acres would be planted to corn. They come up with 89.5. That's 2.5 million acres less in corn. So, and you look back a year ago, to the actual number was 93.4. So it's kind of amazing. It'd been rumored or talked about that we might see an acre switch, but the sales of seed and whatnot and fertilizer didn't show us anything to this magnitude. Where'd the acres disappear at? All three I states, Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana, lost 300 million acres. Minnesota's down 600,000 acres. North Dakota's down 500,000. Ohio was the only major state that I think they added 50 million. So otherwise, most of the major corn growing states are going to plant less corn than expected. So right after that report came out, corn, it never hit limit higher, but it steadily went higher and ended the day on the high side. So this morning, it was kind of back to even. Maybe they're going to, right before the open this morning, it was just a touch higher. But it appears that new crop corn will now exceed, $6. Maybe we'll work on that $6.50 local bid, and not saying that's going to be the right place to be, but it'd be a place to get started and make some sales, protect the high-cost inputs you're putting in there. When we looked at the bean numbers, kind of a flip-flop there. There was 22 million more bushel in stocks than expected. Again, not a huge mover deal. But when you look at compared to a year ago, there's 368 million more bushels in the U.S. than a year ago. We knew the exports were running behind, way behind a year ago. If you'll remember, China came in and tried to do the best they could on the phase one trade deal. But once the administrations changed, they changed. And we haven't seen them back in high numbers like we did a year ago. So that's going to be an influence going forward. Now we get to the estimated planting acres, and this is where it kind of gets wild. They anticipate a record 91 million acres going to beans this coming year, and that's versus 88.9 last year. So 2.1 million acres more. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. 88.9 average guess, but if you go back to a year ago, we planted 87.2. So that's 3.8 million acres more than a year ago. That could translate to a lot of beans. Now, if you talk to processors and people in the oil business, the soy oil business, they want more bushels. They think as these new plants come online in the next 2-3 years, we're going to need a lot more beans to supply those plants. But already the question's coming back around, what do we do with the bean mill? We've got to be able to export that bean meal away from those plants so they can keep operating. So I thought, well, let's look at wheat. We normally don't talk about wheat in this part of the world, but the wheat stocks were down about 19 million from what they thought there was, down 291 million from last year at this time. So that's a fair number. That kind of explains some of the increase in wheat prices. The estimated planting of all wheat was 47.4 million. That's versus 47.9 expected, so not a big swap. Last year they planted 46.7. So with those numbers, 700,000 more acres of wheat. A lot of people thought there might be a more spring wheat planted this year because of the market. Today it doesn't appear that will happen, but you got to remember these numbers were collected in early March, and farmers are notorious at changing their mind on a dime, you might say, so there could still be a swap in some of this. So we add those acres all up of the three major crops, we come up with 227.9 expected acres to be planted. Looking at last year's actuals, 227.3, so we're within 500,000 acres. That also tells us that cotton and some of the other crops that are record high did not steal a lot of acres, or they haven't yet. I would have thought cotton might have come in there and swiped some more acres, being that they're at record high prices. Sorghum is good money. There's some other crops that are doing quite well right now. So back on the beans, kind of the flip-flop of corn, they were down roughly 40 cents or between 40 and 45 cents after the report. They on the overnight, they were trying to bounce back a little bit. The funds are kind of in a precarious situation right now. Some of them are looking to liquidate, get out of Dodge while they got some skin left on them. But there's still a segment out there that wants to be supportive of what they own in the bean market. So as we see some of these major declines, I think we'll have buying come in and probably help support us. China is the wild card. Now that we've reduced the numbers a little bit, I think they'll be in here buying more beans. On the flip side, they might finally come around and buy corn. I think they were sitting back waiting for the price to come down. Now they might be on the other side thinking we better get in here and buy it before it gets any higher. So with that, Scott, that corn market's going to influence the cattle feeding quite a bit in the coming year. What do you got to say?
Yes, it is, Mark. Today's the first day of April. Waking up to 3 inches of snow yesterday was kind of a shocker, but I hope all you guys that are calving are getting along all right through all this. Forecast looks like there's more chances of rain coming next week, so the grass is greened up and it's ready to take off. We just need that rain and some warm sunshine to make it go. So now's a good time to talk about fertilizing pastures and hay ground. I don't need to tell you the fertilizer prices are up this spring, but so are feed costs. I think a guy needs to look at the cost versus the rewards. $50 worth of urea on a pasture will buy you extra days of grazing. How much would hay or supplement cost you if you didn't buy those extra days? Same thing with hay. How much will you get compared to what it will ultimately cost you next fall? Spraying pastures, that can take away some weed pressure and replace it with some grass, and that'll help extend your grazing season that way. This might save you some additional expense later in the season. Costs are higher on most everything, higher than most people have ever seen, actually. The only good thing is the markets, they seem to be able to support these prices right now. But we need to look at every dollar that we spend and make sure that every dollar is our best value. Make sure to take advantage of any special pricing. We might not need it right now at this time, but if we can lock in a savings, I think we should at least take a good look at it. Mike and myself try to pass on as much information about pricing and industry forecasts as we can. Most of the time we can't tell you what the price will do, but we try to set you up to make the best decision that you can make. So if you need help with fertilizer or spraying, contact one of our SFG agronomists, and if you need help with some feed and pricing, call Mike or myself. We're going to be here to help you try to succeed through all this. That's about all I got today, Mark.
Well, thanks, Scott. This concludes this edition of the Feed and Grain podcast. We welcome you to log in on our website whenever possible. Check for updates on this and other information that's readily available there. Changes weekly. We try to keep it updated. We also post our grain markets there every day. Thank you for tuning in.